Speaking multiple languages can take on some wild rides, whether it's from Miss Universe to heads of state. But today I'm going to tell you how languages took me into the dark underworld of people smuggling around the world.
To follow the smuggler's trail, Stuart is asking about places and people described by the boat crews during their court cases in Australia.
There's a safe house where refugees are being kept in this area before they go to Australia. I'm not going to say where we are because we could put people in jeopardy. We're also going to leave our broadcast camera behind because it could be quite dangerous.
And actually stayed in that world for several years. And the results of what happened in that people smuggling world have lasted all the way up to today. Now, this story has high seas, jungles, danger, dodgy plane rides, and even castles in France where I get to marry the princess. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride because this one is a bumpy one. Back in 2010, because of the political situation and a bunch of other things, I found myself, after many years of not having even stepped foot in Australia, in having to live in Australia. What do? I had had my company, my TV show, everything back in Thailand, and I found myself as a fish out of water. All roads led to interpreting. What do you do when you speak a bunch of languages? And so from interpreting, especially Indonesian then, the topic of people smuggling was a big one. And what happened, you had people, because of the war, who had been forced out of Afghanistan, Iran. They'd all moved into places like Dubai, Qatar, and they were paying people sometimes $20,000 to $40,000 to go all the way from Qatar in Pakistan or Dubai or Afghanistan down. They'd fly, they'd pay smugglers to get them into places like Malaysia, through KL, even Bangkok and Jakarta. And then they would have smugglers take them there, take their passports, often on fake passports and swapping out over the way, and take them into safe houses, which were guarded. Now, if you want to see more of this, Al Jazeera actually did a documentary on the work that we did back then, and you'll be seeing some footage of that documentary through my story here.
There's a safe house where refugees are being kept in this area before they go to Australia. I'm not going to say where we are because we could put people in jeopardy. We're also going to leave our broadcast camera behind because it could be quite dangerous.
Unexpectedly, one of the refugees contacts us again. He wants to meet us and tell his story in person. He tells us he was an interpreter with the US Army in Afghanistan and is now running for his life.
Some Afghani people, some Taliban people, they said, I'm a criminal for some of the Taliban because I work with the United States.
Right.
I was with the US Army as an interpreter. They say it's illegal in Islam.
We will call him Amir. He's 22 and has never been on the ocean.
So as they go into these safe houses, which are protected by people in the community as well as the smuggling gangs, they're held there anywhere from 3, 6, 9 months. And these people who are being smuggled actually have to pay. Now, there's a difference between people smuggling and human trafficking. Human trafficking, it's disgusting. It's when people steal other human beings and sell them into sex working, into slavery, and all of these different things. And it's horrible. People smuggling is when people are trying to be smuggled out of a bad situation to another place. So in this case, people, if they can get to Christmas Island, which is Australian territory, then they have a right, well, they thought they had a right to get asylum in Australia. And so this was the deal. People smugglers would charge a fortune and use their lines to get them all the way from Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, all the way down, and finally get them so they could at least be captured off the waters in Christmas Island, which is actually closer to Jakarta than it is to Indonesia, but there's a tiny little island called Christmas Island, and they have a 12-kilometer contiguous zone that if the boat can get into that area and Australian authorities capture them, then Australian authorities have to put them into a immigrant detention center where they can then start their processing to get asylum in Australia. Now, the downside is that the poor kids that were basically targeted and used as mules to drive the boats, these really dodgy boats, would get captured and be put in jail for a minimum of 5 years for people smuggling.
Like Kasim Magan. He is also 22 and has just been convicted of people smuggling. Kasim is being held in a maximum security prison in Brisbane. Our next stop is to see his family to deliver the bad news. It's a long journey. To get there, Stuart and I must take 2 planes and then a boat, flying over just some of the 17,000 islands that make up the Indonesian archipelago. Kasim left home at 16 to look for work, a concept known as merantau.
You have to understand, in Indonesia, it's not like you have a regular job or you go out, especially if you work on the oceans. They go there and wait around for work, maybe to a port with many boats, and people take on crews. And so some of them have been like that and been recruited like that, just got onto a boat. Some of them, the village head has told the kids, the young people, to go out and help their uncle on the boat make noodles. And they didn't realize that they were being fed into these people smuggling syndicates.
Stuart has been to Kasim's village before to get documents and evidence for his trial. There's no way to contact his family in advance other than coming here to let them know he's lost his case.
And so they take this boat loaded with humans, and then the people being smuggled have to stay down. And so these Indonesian kids would be making mama noodles for them. And as they got to the point, they'd travel down the southern coast of Indonesia and through what's called Nusa Tenggara. As they get to Kupang, when they're about to go across down to Christmas Island, the captains would often jump ship and say, "Kids, it's all yours." And these kids, or people that didn't have a clue, would be left with the rudders of this boat and under threat, because you've got a boat full of people who have paid tens of thousands of dollars each to get to Australia. So they're under threat of these guys, and some of these gangs are pretty bad. And they would basically have to hold the rudders. They said, our friends would pick you up. Who are the friends? The Australian Navy. Little did they know. So they would drive for another maybe half a day. They'd be intercepted by the Navy. The asylum seekers would get asylum back then in a detention center on Christmas Island. And these kids would basically go to the detention center, be processed, and then face the Australian legal system, where they're charged for people smuggling, reckless smuggling. If 5 or more people, they go to prison for 5 years. Now, this is where I stepped in. I was interpreting in courts for the Australian Federal Police, looking into investigating these cases. I was doing the inductions into prisons, as many of these, often kids, some of them underage kids, were coming into the Australian prisons. And I was meeting them, talking and getting to meet the victims of these the people smuggling gangs, and hearing their stories of how they were recruited, how their parents were paid off, how the village heads were paid off, how they were forced to stay and hold the rudders while the captains jumped ship, and they're the ones who end up in jail. And it sucked. And I'm seeing these kids, and nobody was fighting their case. Basically, they're fighting the Crown, the Commonwealth. And so the Commonwealth, basically, they're just slam dunk cases. You go into prison. The prison system makes money on them. Just to transfer these kids from the prison to the courthouse each day during their trials, if they went to trial, cost thousands of dollars. It's just insane how much money there is in keeping these kids in the system, or these smugglers in the system in Australia, in the legal system. And so there was a lawyer there, and David and I thought, this really sucks.
His Australian lawyer, David Svoboda, travelled to Kupang himself to get Faisal's birth certificate. The day before Faisal's age determination hearing, the court threw the case out. David says juvenile Indonesians are often kept in adult prisons in Australia.
There's been 30 to 40 cases that I know of over a lengthy period. I personally have been involved in 3 matters, and a number of other lawyers I know in Brisbane have been involved in 6 to 7 matters.
and nobody's fighting the case for these kids. It's basically, you got them there, here's another one. The law firms would basically be given these token cases to fight, but nobody assumed that they would win the cases for the smugglers, and they just go to prison. The lawyers do their job saying, we fought it, we couldn't do anything, sorry, you go to jail for 5 years, and that was that. Well, that sucked. And so David did one case, and then we thought, well, look, these guys under Australian law have a right to fight their case. And so we started to lobby the government and get a little bit of funding to start to fly to Indonesia to see if we could collect evidence to show that these kids were recruited or they might be underage. But most of all, that these kids were not the people smugglers. They were victims of gangs. I would be sitting in the courthouse sometimes, and I would hear these Hazaragi. I could understand Farsi, and so I'd be hearing these Hazaragi gangs in the courthouse while these Indonesians are going to trial, extorting families, threatening families, and they were talking or pointing the finger at the people who had saved their lives, who had brought them into Australia, and these guys had got asylum, and the Indonesian kids are going to jail. And I thought that really, really sucked. And so I was learning who the gangs were, where they were located, and how these kids were recruited, just talking to them one-on-one. The final tipping point was I was waiting in an Australian prison one day for these three people smugglers to be inducted into the prison. And they were late. And we waited and waited and waited. And it turned out that they didn't turn up that day because they were found to be underage.
Faisal says he spent 5 months in the adult prison despite telling authorities repeatedly that he was under 18. He was given a wrist x-ray to determine his age through bone density. But this technology has been widely disputed by the medical community.
And so what happened? We waited. There was an AFP doctor's examination of bone marrow density, and mysteriously the reports came back that these kids were all born basically on the 1st of January 18 years ago, which made them 18 years old, so they qualified to go to adult prison. They came here, and that sucked. And so we actually went and fought those cases and got the evidence to show these kids were actually 15, 14 years old. I think they were 15, 14, maybe 16 years old. They were underage. And so this is the thing. You got to choose. Are you just going to sit and be an interpreter, or are you going to do something that's much bigger and can really make a difference? And so I made a decision that I wanted to go for it. I'm not just going to sit and interpret for these guys and watch them go to prison. I want to fight for them. And so David and then myself started to travel to Indonesia. And because I speak Indonesian, I would travel through the jungles and into all these places to try and retrace the footsteps of these smuggling gangs and get evidence, birth certificates, information on how they were recruited, what happened, the situation, so then I could go back as an expert witness, testify in the Supreme Court in Australia, and hope to get these guys released. And we did. We started winning cases. Enter who is now my wife. She had graduated international relations, international studies at university, and was thinking of working for the UN, maybe some humanitarian missions. And I said, come along with me on one of these missions if you want to see if you want to do it or not. She came. I think the first trip was to Sumba, and we hit it off. And we ended up being this super team that we could travel through jungles, across oceans. This one place we went to was called Pulau Meginti. It's a 500 by 1,000 meter island in the middle of nowhere. We had to travel through the air. We went to Makassar, and then we had to travel to a place called Kendari. Took forever. From Kendari, we had to go to Raha, which was another boat ride forever. By the time we got there, the sun was setting. We think, holy crap, well, maybe it's only allowed 30 kilometers. Oh my God, that 30 kilometers to get to the place where we would go off to this Pulau Meginti took 5 hours, and nobody was going to take us. Finally, one guy who was very sketchy.
Where that you are? Dark, but on the way to Jazeera.
Took us, and there were snakes and shit in the car, and we were driving through. We finally found ourselves in pitch black, sitting with buffaloes around us on the shores of this ocean.
Okay, I don't know if you can see that flashing in the distance there, but that's the fishing boat. Just gone to McGinty Island, and there's some lights up there. See that flashing? That's the lights, and they're coming off the boat. It is now almost 11 p.m. Oh, and there's the light. See, they're coming up towards us. We couldn't get out to the island because we got here at night time, and there's only the fishing boat, small fishing boat, available. So we had to move them over. There's no electricity, as you can see all around here. There's no electricity on the island either. It's pitch black. The house here belonging to the fishermen who went on remote, but it's all black. They're coming up now.
I had to negotiate out of a dicey situation with one gang, all in Indonesian, of course, and we finally made our way down. And basically, this was one case where I thought, I'm not going to put our lives at risk, and so one person from the village went across in this little one-person fishing boat and waited hours. We're sitting there with mosquitoes. Finally, hours after, maybe around midnight, the boat pulled in, and there were 16 people coming across from this island on a one-person boat, or one or two-person fishing boat. And we got to interview these people.
Oke, ada apa-apa yang mau dikatakan, yang mau disampaikan kepada Pak Sampai?
Bapak sejaring.
Apa lagi?
Bapak pulang sejaring.
Iya. Okay.
I got that evidence, videoed the evidence. It was pitch black, so we had to use makeshift lights. So I took that evidence back, presented it in court, and try and get this person released from prison. There were other cases where people weren't successful in the cases, but in the end, because of the work that we did, I think over 160 people got released back to Australia, because this was becoming such a scandal of these people just going to the system and the system feeding off of these victims of people smuggling gangs. So many people got returned. They changed the law on being able to report on these things, and then they started moving people to Manus Island rather than Christmas Island, and locked down all media. And basically, if you look now, you can't see anything that's going on in these places because all of the bad press that happened back then. But anyway, this is an example of how languages can open up the world to you and take you to amazing places. If you are just sitting there and thinking, I'm going to be a language teacher, I'm going to teach English, I might be an interpreter, there's so much more to do. And I think more than anything, this is why these shock videos of just people speaking a couple of words just to get people shocked on the streets maybe irks me. I was thinking about it since I put the clip up the other week, and it's because if that shock thing happened while I was doing all of this, I'd probably be dead or in prison. You need to be able to speak the language in a way that the people can relate to you just as one of them or close to them. And so, especially when you're in a dicey situation, so you can get out of them. You don't want them to be shocked. Your language is a tool for existing, for actually being able to live. And so I hope that through these clips that I'm putting out, that language will go through from a thing in the West as well, from, oh, this is shock, check this guy out, he's blowing them away, speaking in the market in New York, to, holy crap, look what you can do with language, and hearing what's actually going on the ground and what language opens you up to. Oh, I almost forgot one of the most important things, that amazing woman that traveled across oceans, through jungles, went through thick and thin, dodgy people smugglers. Well, we got married in a castle in France. We now have our lovely daughter, and hopefully we'll live happily ever after. Where will language take us next? Let's see. I'm Stuart J. Raj. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, come to our Discord server, scan the QR code, and I'll see you on the other side. Bye.